I think the fact that there were meetings is probably good. The difficulty I have with what the United States is doing right now with Washington is that we're treating the Russians as though they are in a position that would oblige them or would compel them to compromise. They're not. We need to admit something up front, which we have failed to admit categorically, and that is that Russia has won the war. So to the victor go the spoils. And right now, we should be more respectful of the Russian position. We have done enormous damage to Russian soldiers by providing extensive weaponry and support to the Ukrainians. We should also turn to this Ukrainian leadership and say, you've had it, it's over. You have failed. And frankly, we should remove Zelensky. Now, people say, oh, what the United States can't do that. Of course we can. We could signal very clearly that Zelensky and his little band is absolutely unacceptable to us. We need a new government. We could have talked about a temporary ceasefire for the purpose of holding elections in Ukraine. There are a number of things we could have done. We didn't do any of those. And so we simply said, ceasefire, and we will do the Russians a great favor by negotiating with them. It's ridiculous. Doesn't make any sense. So I don't expect very much to come out of the discussion today unless we are prepared to go in with a different position, which says you've won the war. We are going to prevail upon Kiev to talk with you, and we acknowledge the conditions that you have set down. But I don't see that happening. I don't think that's understood in Washington. So I think we will see a conversation today in which President Putin is polite, but not much more.
Okay, yes, he said we'll see. Well, you speak about the US position. It's pretty clear. We are here in Paris, so we are absorbing different declarations of the French president and other leaders. Why do Europeans not understand, or maybe don't want to understand, that Ukraine is a cornerstone of the security architecture, and it's a huge red line for Russia, and its neutrality key for peace and stability? It's rather simple.
Yes, except that we in Washington, and I think the globalist leaders in London and Paris and Berlin, sadly, have never recognized Russia's legitimate national security interests. That's very important. We've never said, yes, Russia has a legitimate interest in what happens in Ukraine, just as we in the United States have a legitimate interest in what happens in Mexico. What we tolerate? Not very much. If Mexico suddenly joined a foreign alliance and large numbers of Russian, Chinese, or other nationalities started to show up in Mexico, build an army whose sole purpose was to, quote unquote, liberate territories taken from Mexico in 1846, 47, 48, then we would act very decisively. So I think there's a failure to clearly understand what's happening in Europe. Europeans have not been told the truth. The media lies prolifically in Europe, as you know. 99% of all the terrible things that the Russians were accused of doing were things the Ukrainians actually did. I think the European populations, the European electorates, are coming around to understanding that this war is devastating not just for Ukraine, but ultimately for Europe, and it needs to end. But their governments are not yet there. And I think it will take time before all of these governments are fundamentally changed, but I think that's coming.
There's a wishful thinking. And in Europe, I speak about Europe because it's our everyday life. And the reality of the battlefield, actually. And you, on your account, X account, You say Russia has won the war and now they have to make some decisions. So you are talking about Zelensky. In this circumstances, how do you see the future of Zelensky? Because actually, who will sign the peace agreement? He's not legal anymore. And how do Europeans see that?
Well, this is the point that I was trying to make. He's not legitimate. We need to stop pretending that he is. So if we're asking for some sort of ceasefire, it should be tied to something tangible, like the emergence of a new government. We haven't done that. I don't know why President Trump puts up with the man. It doesn't make any sense. He has the authority and the power to simply send him away and his friends. But we're not doing it. And the longer we wait to do it, the more likely it is that President Putin will do it. I mean, if you're in the Russian position right now, what is your alternative to what President Trump is suggesting? It is to advance further to the West.
I have some geopolitical but profound issue because I've been organizing many conferences about that. Strictly from this point of view, the US till now, I mean maybe the Biden administration wanted to cut Europe from Russia. And we know Zbigniew Brzezinski and his book, The Grand Chessboard, and all this kind of declarations that it's done. Well, how will Trump act, you think, according to you, act in face of BRICS on the one hand, and Europe on the other hand, because he's a businessman, he's a real businessman. How to establish a strong partnership with both for him? How will act according to you?
I don't see any evidence right now for a coherent strategy in Washington.
Okay.
This is very important. In other words, what is the strategic framework? What are America's goals? What is the United States trying to achieve? We hear a great deal about, well, I'm going to make a deal. What does that mean? To what purpose? In other words, if you're the president of the United States, you say you want to end the war, that's fine. But that involves a lot of things. How do you go about ending the war? Well, first of all, in order to end the war, Moscow has to decide to end the war. In other words, we talk as though we are in a vacuum and that Moscow is expected to simply say, oh, yes, we'll end the war. But for what purpose? And on the Russian side, the Russians want confirmation that Ukraine, when it emerges from this war, will be neutral, number one. There will be a government somewhere in Ukraine, whether it's in Kiev or Lvov, I don't know, but it will not be allied with any foreign powers hostile to Russia. Very simple, very straightforward. Now, we can go into denazification and other matters, but I think that is unavoidable if you're going to end this whole thing. The people that brought about this war must be gone. Now, what do we want to achieve? No one ever asks President Trump, what do you want to achieve? What is your goal in the negotiations with Russia? I think the goal is normalize relations with Russia. In other words, get out of this permanent condition of hostility. That should be our number one concern. Number two, let's sit down with Russia's neighbors, and I'm talking about Lithuania, Poland, and really, we're talking about Ukraine's neighbors, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and probably Germany, simply because Germany has a permanent strategic interest in what happens in Eastern Europe and always has. Sit down with them and say, here's the map. How do we redraw the map? This is not a matter of voting. This is a matter of great powers deciding where the boundaries will go. And if you are a Russian, you look at the map, you know that for most of the last 500 years, the Dnieper River has tended to be a boundary of importance to Russia and importance to the West. If you go back through the history of Kiev, it was probably Polish-Lithuanian longer than it was ever Russian. So let's be honest. Let's look at the map and say, what are Russia's bottom line requirements? We know about neutrality, no foreign forces, no foreign bases, no opening of war against Russia. Clear. But what do the boundaries look like? I know what I would say, but I don't know what President Trump is going to say. I have no idea. I don't even know if he's thought in those terms. In Europe, wars usually end with the redrawing of boundaries to the satisfaction of the belligerents, the people that fought the war. That's what has to happen now. But I don't see anyone talking about it at all. In the meantime, what do you do if you're President Putin? You order your forces to advance. Roll up to Zaporizhia, roll up to the river, roll up to Kiev. Then you have to make a decision. Are you going to cross and seize Odessa? Odessa is historically a Russian city. It was never a Ukrainian city. Now, are we going to, is that something Russia is demanding, or is that up for discussion? Is Moscow prepared to compromise on that particular issue? Is Russia finally going to take Kharkov once and for all, which is also historically a Russian city? I don't know, but these are the frank conversations that have to happen. I don't think we're even close to that. So I don't know what the hell this conversation is about. And keep in mind, last night, we apparently, according to reports, attacked and sank an Iranian intelligence ship. Well, in most of the world, in international law, that's an act of war.